how to know intermediate lessons in divination. I assume you all already knew that. A long slide. I'm going to be on it for a while. Anybody have any questions about anything I've said? Okay, so we're going to talk about some methods. Again, this is in no way intended to be like an exhaustive list, right? And at the end, I would like to hear you guys tell me about kinds I forgot, right? Or didn't know about. So true dreaming is one divinatory method. It's where you get reliable answers and information in your dreams. I personally believe, and I'm going to come back and talk about this many times in this class, I believe that our culture glorifies sleep deprivation with an insidious intent to steal your dreams from you. And I encourage you to like take them back, to arrange your life to make space for dreaming, which I know I said I wasn't going to preach, but like on this one thing, I really am an evangelist. Like, take your dreams back. They have been stolen from you by our gross culture that wants you to like go, 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 because our culture doesn't want you to be able to dream, and they really don't want you to be able to true dream. But really, at the end of the day, the number one thing to get better at true dreaming is to get better quality sleep. Like get as much sleep as you need and get high quality sleep. Yeah, and we'll talk. I'm going to do a whole lesson on dreams. I love oneiromancy, so we're going to talk about that a lot. Sortilege, I've been talking about a lot. That's when you're choosing from a set of fixed answers, right? Now, of course, most of us when we sortilege are actually also doing some of the other things, right? Like usually we're going to sort of combine methods. You know, like a magic 8-ball is sortilege qua sortilege. It just spits out an answer. There's no, like the reader isn't really doing anything. It spits out a specific fixed answer. There's not really much interpretation, sortilege, but objectively, most people are combining sortilege with lots of other things, right? Scrying is when you're finding meaning in semi-random phenomena. Most people, when they use the word scrying, are talking about visually. So the example I always use is like finding images in clouds. But smoke, I really like incense smoke. I like flames, right? I like dark mirror scrying. We'll talk about all kinds of things, but also I'm going to use the word scrying also for when I do it in sound, which, as we've mentioned, I do much more often, right? So like the same way I find images in clouds, I find a whisper in the wind, right? And I personally find that much easier than visual scrying, but I think they're basically the same phenomenon, right? You're just doing them differently. Reading omens, right? We'll come back and talk about that, but like, so something I got when we were listening to that Thoth teaching is about how you're not always looking for a pattern. You're looking for something that breaks the pattern, right? That the most important things are weird. Like they're not the thing that happens all the time, but then in order to see those things, you have to have like a baseline, right? So if you want to like read omens in the flights of birds, you have to observe birds enough to know what is and is not just normal bird behavior, right? Or I'm sure we've all seen these posts on Facebook where somebody like burns a candle down and it left a wax pool, and they're like, what is the omen in this wax pool? But you know, unless you burn that kind of candle enough to know what is and isn't normal behavior from those candles, it's pretty hard to find omens in them, right? Like omens are about interpreting unusual phenomena, like something weird happened and you want to know why. We'll talk about this very much more extensively in future lessons. My biggest rule of thumb is that you should completely ignore omens that don't repeat. Like in any omen worth anything will repeat, right? And when it repeats the third time, maybe it's time to start paying attention to it, right? But otherwise, you'll just drive yourself crazy because everything is like, we live in a really weird, dense environment compared to our ancestors. Like we're just under barrage of like weird fucking shit happening all the time. Like we act as though we live in a less magical world than our ancestors, but actually we live in a world that is so thick with crazy fucking shit happening all the time. The weather is broken. Like the world is so crazy and weird. Like capital W, got a Y in there, weird. Like we live in a weird, dense world that like you can't pay attention to all of it. You'll go crazy. Like we live in a much, much more magical world than our ancestors did. So much so that the kind of magic they were doing, like we barely even notice because we're just under assault all the time, right? Trance journey, we talked, I think, I'm sorry, I don't remember who was talking about trance journey. I think a lot of people in this class have some experience with trance journey. And that's, you're basically seeking knowledge in, I just call it the other place. We can call it whatever like fancy words we want, but there's really this sense that you are going to a different place, right? And experiencing like a landscape, like a fairy tale world where you interact with spirits and things and landscapes in a way that provides information. Just straight up speaking to spirits, you prayer and response, you seance, right? All of those things, just straight up speaking to spirits. I personally am particularly fond of that method. That's sort of my go-to method. Oracular addercism. Addercism is a really convenient word. It's the opposite of exorcism. It just means getting possessed on purpose, right? So getting possessed on purpose to like speak prophecy, again, that's a favored method of mine. It's a method that I encourage people to, like, you kind of need more than one person. Like somebody has to get possessed and somebody else has to like be in their right mind, paying attention to what's going on for that to be like a good method, right? It's a little dangerous, like psychologically dangerous otherwise without a buddy, right? But you can do sort of like a buffered version of it. So automatic writing and automatic drawing are actually like special cases of oracular addercism that are like a little bit more buffered out. So you're not maybe fully possessed. You're just like a little bit possessed, right? I love automatic writing as a technique. I do it a ton, but I mean, I'm a writer. So, but also it's a technique I learned very early. If anybody didn't take the intro class, I know a lot of people here have not taken my intro class, which is fine. If anybody wants, just let me know. I have 4 or 5 pages on automatic writing that I can just pull out of that class and send anybody who wants them. Mind reading. Mind reading is when you read other humans' minds. So you understand silent, invisible human communication. Is that because you're smelling their pheromones? Is that because you're seeing their micro expressions? I neither know nor care. Like mind reading means you're looking at a person and reading their mind. How exactly you did that is not super relevant to me. I will say personally, I did not realize how much I relied on smelling people until I had to wear a mask all the time. Turns out some amount, but not all, but some amount of my mind reading is about smelling them, right? Knowing. Sometimes you just know stuff. How did you know it? I don't know. I feel like for me, that knowing is sometimes like the mind reading kind and sometimes like the future telling kind for me. I find that bothersome. I often know things I wish I didn't. So like I didn't need to know that my boss was cheating on his wife. Like I didn't need to know that. That had nothing to do with me. It would have been better if that stayed in his head and not in my head, but whatever. Sometimes you just know stuff. Sometimes you know that something bad is coming, even though there's like nothing you can do about it. I dream. So when the Sandy Hook school shootings took place, the school I worked at was very close, physically close to Sandy Hook. And also like I taught high school, more than one of my students had gone to Sandy Hook. Like I had some connection there. I dreamed about school shootings for a week before that happened, which I told many students. And that was among the beginning of like Miss Mastros is real creepy. But they knew that. Like I don't hide it very well. Like they all knew Miss Mastros was a little creepy. Sometimes you just know things. How do you know them? In this class, we're going to learn a lot of methods to provoke that knowing. But the most important knowing is knowing which things are capital K knowing and which aren't. And honestly, I find it's maybe actually not that hard to know. It's like true dreaming. Once you're getting good quality sleep, good quality dreaming, that true ones, they just have a totally different texture to them. Like, it's not actually hard to tell the difference between true dreams and regular dreams. They're just different, right? And it's the same with knowing. I think, when that bell goes off inside of you and you just capital K know, I actually don't think it requires a lot of discernment. And the cases where it does require discernment, that's not what I would call capital K knowing, right? And then, right, we've got this complex thing, which I call understanding, right? Where we're putting together all these different kinds of knowings. Maybe we got some of them from different divination methods. We got some from lots of other situations, and we're going to kind of come to this holistic understanding. But there's a role for divination in that as well, right? Like, that is also a divinatory skill. So first, does anybody have any questions about any of the ones that are on this list? Okay. And then the next question is, does anybody have what did I forget about? There's probably lots of things that just aren't on this list, because this is not intended to be a comprehensive list. Also, I understand there's a lot of overlap.
Sarah?
Yes.
If you're using like a set of bones that you have, or like a random assortment, would you put that under sortilege?
I would, okay. Although, the process of deciding what goes in that bag, right? Because when people are reading bones, it's not like tarot where there's like a correct, there's certain cards that have to be there for it to be tarot, right? Whereas, at least the way I was taught to read bones, it's kind of like everybody's bag has different stuff in it, right? And so there's kind of a previous part, right? A previous divinatory skill, which is about assembling the things in your bag, about seeing something and you're like, aha, I capital K know that should be in my bag. But then once you're using the ones that are in there, I would call that sortilege.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And of course, there's this mixed case where you throw a bunch of them down and they make a picture that you're looking at the same way you would look at tea leaves or something, which is more like a scrying on top of a sortilege. At least that's the way I was taught to read bones, is that it's not just about the individual tokens. It's about the geometric relationship between the tokens, which I do in all kinds of sortilege. I do that with tarot cards as well. I'm very geometric about it.
Sarah, where would you put pendulums?
Oh, that's a good question. So, okay, so we've got this whole category that I don't have on here. That's motor kinetic kinds. It depends on how you do it. So if you're using a pendulum, if it swings back and forth, that means yes. If it swings front and back, that means no. That's sortilege, right? Because it's got a multiple choice answer. But if you're holding a pendulum over a map, that's more like scrying, I would say.
Or a probability chart or multiple choices.
Yeah, I mean, once you've got fixed choices, it's sort of, again, the methods aren't fully separate, but yeah, there's another kind that I didn't talk at all about, which is, it has a name that is escaping me. I'm just going to call it psychomotor kind.
Yeah, because I've done a technique too where you write possible outcomes on pieces of paper and you turn them over and stand on them and you feel a response in your body to each of those different choices.
Yeah, right. There's this whole category, or there's a thing called muscle testing. The way I would taught it, you put one and you push on your arms. I will say personally, I'm not very good at those methods, so I don't think about them a lot. But yes, there's this. I agree. That's a whole category that I missed on this list.
Okay.
But again, they kind of bleed into each other. So if you're using, a pendulum over top of, if you go this way, it means this. If you go that way, it means that. They were starting to bleed into sortilege. Similarly, a Ouija board is kind of in between, a psychomotor one and a speaking to spirits one. Personally, I will say I find a Ouija board to be the hardest method there is for talking to the dead. So much harder than just talking to dead people, in my opinion.
Yeah, so much more to manipulate and control, and
I'm just bad at those psychomotor ones.
Yeah.
Okay, also, thanks. Remind me and I'll tell a story about my first experience with a Ouija board sometime.
Would we put sorry, would we put bibliomancy under sortilege and like scrying, kind of like a mix of the?
Oh, that's complicated. Yeah, I would call bibliomancy probably a combination of those. Yeah. Again, my goal isn't to list like all the methods so much as to just like get people thinking outside of the box of like all the other options. But yeah, bibliomancy is definitely on this list. I would actually maybe in some sense call it a kind of minor omen reading also. Right? Because at least when I do bibliomancy, like there's a lot, it's the interpretation is sort of the hardest part of that. As opposed to like sortilege, where I find like once you know what you're doing, like once you really have some experience with tarot, there's maybe like not that much interpretation. Like the cards just say what they say. You know, whereas I feel like bibliomancy, at least for me, requires more on my end. That's another good kind that I didn't think of to put on the list. Anybody else have suggestions for stuff that's not on the list?
Just to co-sign on the pendulum, I popped it in the chat, but one of my favorite pendulums is a chamber pendulum. And the one that I'm working with most often now, I filled with a combination of your Mercury, your Mercuralia and Hecate incenses.
Oh, that sounds fun.
And they help me when I am divining.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about doing that. That's a cool idea. I'm going to try that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. All righty. Okay, so now this next slide, this is, I think, the same list, right? But now I'm just going to talk about some of the like pro cons, right? Like why we might like some methods more than others, right? So true dreaming, it's fun. It just, I don't know what to say. I think it's fun. It feels super witchy. Like I like it, right? It's really open-ended, right? Like you can get much more like sophisticated, complex answers out of it than you could out of something like tarot. It's socially acceptable. People don't always believe me when I say that, but it is. Like people in our culture accept that some people have dreams that come true. And that might make you weird or creepy, but like people agree, like it's acceptable. Like that's a thing that people do. All right, downsides of true dreaming is that it's kind of hard. Like compared to learning tarot, it's much harder to learn to dream true, right? We'll talk about that more later. And it's slow, right? It takes like a whole night to answer a question. Like you can't, it's not like you can be at a festival dream and a true dream for every person every 15 minutes, right? Like that's not an option. So sortilege, on the other hand, it's buffered. So especially, you know, I always come back to like this festival thing. If you're going to read for 20 people, 15 minutes, boom, 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 over and over, you don't want to be all up in their psychic miasma, right? Like you don't want to have to read their mind. There's all kinds of like weird, nasty shit in there that you don't want to know. So the sortilege, the cards or whatever, they give you a buffer, right? Like between you and the other person. It doesn't require as deep of a trance state as some of these other ones, right? It's buffered. It's easy compared to the rest of them. And, you know, there's some book learning you got to do, but it's easy in the sense like it doesn't wear you out the same way. Like, you know, trance journey, it's exhausting and like physically bad for you. Getting possessed over and over, it's exhausting and physically bad for you. You couldn't possibly just do it over and over and over, like professionally all day long, right? But sortilege, that's in my opinion, like it's benefit, it's easy. Like it just doesn't, once you know what you're doing, like the cards do a lot of the work for you. Again, it's pretty socially acceptable. Like, you know, some people don't approve of it, but nobody thinks you're like insane, right? Okay, it's clunky, right? Like you can't get, like without adding in additional methods. So for many of us who have experience with sortilege, while we're doing the cards, we're like also doing some of these other things, right? We're maybe scrying on the pictures. We're maybe reading the querent's mind a little bit. Maybe we're, you know, we got a spirit in our ear telling us our things. Like those things are happening while we're doing the cards. But without that, it's kind of clunky. Like the answers you get out are not that clear, right? Like they're kind of mechanical, right? It's multiple choice, can only say so many things. Scrying looks like it's really fun, but I'm not very good at it, so I just don't do it a lot. Again, that's visual scrying. For me, truthfully, every time I try and scry, I end up actually speaking to spirits. Like when I appear to be scrying, I'm cheating. I'm actually just talking to a spirit who is telling me things, and I'm looking at a mirror while I do that, but the mirror is not actually doing anything in that context, right? The sounds, are they doing something? Not much. Mostly they're just covering up background noise. I'm maybe actually talking to spirits, right? But either way, I can't talk about scrying. Reading omens is really fun and really witchy. It's very impressive. Like people are impressed when you're like, oh, the crows flew north. That means rain will come. Like people like it. It's slow though. It's slow in the sense like the actual doing of it is slow, right? You can't get boom, 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 answer out of a ton of questions. Like it takes a while and it's hard to learn. Of all the ones on this list, I would say it's perhaps the hardest to learn because, as I said, to interpret unusual natural phenomena, you have to have a deep knowledge of what are usual natural phenomena. And that just takes a long time to learn. But I mean, if you're paying attention to the world you live in, you're doing that learning, right? But I guess I don't trust omen readings from young people. Like I really do think reading omens takes like a decade or two to learn, right? Trance journey is easy for most people. It is, however, physically exhausting. It's surprisingly socially acceptable. Like I didn't know that bougie white ladies were as into trance journey as they are, but it's surprisingly socially acceptable. It's quite prone to bias. Like honestly, of all these methods, I find trance journey the least reliable. Like I don't always trust other people's ability to not project their own nonsense into their trance journey or my own. Like for me and other people, I just think trance journey is like not as reliable as some other methods. But like anything, that's about all those things that Thoth was saying about like centering yourself and clearing your mind and like focusing and not getting distracted and not bringing your own monkey mind, blah, 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 into the process. But trance journey, unlike other things, it has like no buffer against that kind of bias. Like there's nothing to prevent that bias from seeping in. Like you got to do it just on the strength of your character. And that's hard. Speaking to spirits, I think it's fun. It's surprisingly socially acceptable. People don't want to believe that, but like if your grandma said like Jesus says blah 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 blah, yeah, sometimes Jesus talks to grandma. Like sometimes angels talk to people. Like surprisingly socially acceptable. There's a translation issue a lot of times, right? So sometimes, you know, this is what we like Frith and I were saying before. Sometimes, you know, the spirits aren't super, they have their own bias and there's a bit of a translation issue that you need to figure out. But, you know, once you build a relationship with the spirit, that kind of works itself out. It just takes a while to learn their language. Oracular addercism is probably my favorite method. It's really fun. It's super impressive. Like people can tell. Like people who don't believe in it will watch you get possessed and they'll be like, holy fuck. Now, the flip side of impressive is that it's creepy. And sometimes it is dangerous to be too impressive with your magic. That's how people go to the pyre, right? Impressive and creepy are flip sides of the same coin. Oracular addercism is very powerful. It's a little dangerous. Like there is a real danger of becoming like psychologically unhinged from doing that work too often, right? Pro con. Mind reading, in my opinion, is very reliable. It's very stealthy. Like people can tell if you're reading cards, but people can't tell if you're reading their mind. Like you just do it whenever you want. Now, the ethics of mind reading are a little tricky. I personally am ashamed every time I read somebody's mind. Like, oh, that was not my business. I'm going to pretend I don't know that. But I can't always not do it. But when I do it on purpose, like digging into somebody's brain and rifling around to find what you want is an ethically complex thing to do. It is definitely creepy. And also there is a high risk of traumatizing yourself because I assure you, basically everyone has like terrible, nasty, filthy, just brutal, gross shit in their head all the time. And like everybody, right? Everybody has like thoughts that should not be available to others. And when you make those thoughts available to yourself, you're going to see stuff you didn't want to see, right? So, but it is reliable in my experience. Like it doesn't lead me wrong. I just know stuff I didn't want to know. knowing is reliable, right? It's fun and it like fits in with all the other things, but like mind reading, right? It's destabilizing, personally destabilizing, because in some sense you have to be not you in that moment of knowing. Like you have to kind of set that aside and step out of your like ego self, which like we talk about as if it's a good thing, but like, you know, nature made you a person for a reason. Like it's not entirely good for you to depersonalize all the time. Similarly, it is creepy. Other people don't like it. Like other people don't like it. Understanding, in my opinion, which again is basically just combining all of the things until you have like a complete understanding that is built partly out of these more supernatural methods and partly out of careful observation and partly out of precise reasoning and partly out of you're just a smart person who knows a lot of shit. Like that's best. So that's the one I actually encourage people to use all the time, is everything at your disposal. Use all the methods at your disposal, mix them together in the ways that seem best to you.